President Trump has directed the Pentagon to go after Latin American drug cartels the administration labeled as foreign terrorist groups.
Cartels are now officially in the Pentagon's crosshairs.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. The US military is the most powerful in the world, but should it be used against the cartels? Mexico's president says she won't allow it. And Venezuela's leader is a wanted man in the United States, so he certainly won't be cooperating. But can the US military defeat the cartels without their help? We're going to be speaking to a former US Navy SEAL.
This is not a typical military operation. This is guerrilla warfare.
But first, let's look at why President Trump is so determined to take on the cartels on their home ground.
If Mexico can't get a grip on its criminals, America says it will do it for them.
As Mexican cartels flood the country with illegal painkillers.
Fentanyl overdoses are now leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 49.
The New York Times is reporting that President Trump has signed a clandestine directive authorizing the Pentagon to begin planning to use military force on cartels abroad. This could include the deployment of troops and drone strikes to stop the cartels flooding the US with fentanyl.
We've lost hundreds of thousands of American kids. Our future generation has been attacked.
The cartels are the key manufacturers and distributors of the synthetic opioid fentanyl. Precursor chemicals are exported from China, processed in Mexico, and then distributed in the United States. Last year, over 48,000 deaths involved synthetic opioids, predominantly fentanyl.
We have 20 kilograms of fentanyl that's in front of me on this table. That's enough to kill 10 million people.
A recent report estimates the cartels have around 175,000 members, which would make them Mexico's fifth biggest employer. The majority of the cartel's designated terrorist organizations by the US are Mexican. One is El Salvadorian, the other Venezuelan. So who are the main players? The Sinaloa cartel, founded over 30 years ago by the drug lords El Chapo and El Mayo, the cartel's reach extends far beyond Mexico, with partners around the world. It has become the leading producer of fentanyl. Jalisco New Generation, a long-time arch-rival to the Sinaloa cartel, this group now looks poised to become one of the world's largest drug traffickers through an alliance with the Sinaloa faction. This cartel entrenched itself in parts of the illegal and legal sectors of Mexico's economy, profiting not just off drugs and weapons, but also real estate and avocados. Tren de Aragua. Originating in a Venezuelan prison, this cartel's footprint has expanded into multiple countries, including Mexico and the US. The group has become known for exploiting vulnerable migrants through kidnap and trafficking, but it is also actively participating in transnational drug trafficking operations. Using the threat of tariffs, Trump has persuaded Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, to put thousands of troops on the border. He offered US troops too, but she declined.
Cooperamos, colaboramos, pero no va a haber invasión.
In the last few weeks, the US Treasury Department imposed sanctions on Venezuelan cartel de los Soles, accusing them of materially supporting the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. A few days later, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, came out asserting that the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is the head of this recently designated narco-terrorist organization.
He is one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security. Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And today we have the former US Navy SEAL and FBI agent, Jonathan Gilliam, who generally backs Trump's use of the military. And we also have Professor Geoffrey Corn, a former Army intelligence officer and advisor of the laws of war. And finally, we have Craig Deare, a former US military attaché to the US Embassy in Mexico. Welcome to the program, everyone. So, Jonathan Gilliam, the president has ordered the Pentagon to start planning. How serious is it in that stage?
Well, when starting to plan for something, that it signifies, especially when the group that they're planning operations against have been designated as terrorists, which allows all the resources of the federal government to be used. It takes on a very effective, that's the most important thing that people need to understand, an effective step towards any possible operations against that entity. So when President Trump steps forward and says that he wants this to happen, primarily what they're going to be looking at is the intelligence that we have against them, and is there ways to increase this intelligence? And upon that intelligence is how we will develop what missions need to go forward.
Is it necessary to take on the cartels on their own home turf, as it were?
Well, yes, because you have to remember the cartels are a business. You shouldn't look at them as an ideology, and you shouldn't look at them as a military. They have military force. They have standards in the way that they work down there, but ultimately they're a business. And so this is different than what we have faced in a lot of ways, because if their product is not flowing, and if they don't have personnel that are working with them or a base of operations, they're going to cease to function. So it's very important, I believe, whether it's just through intelligence disruption or operations to stop their flow of the product, it will lead to Mexico eventually. Every drug case I ever had in the FBI led to Mexico or to Canada, which would eventually lead back down to Mexico.
Professor Geoffrey Corn, could you tell me if the Trump administration has the legal authority to go after the cartels on foreign soil?
I would begin by pointing out that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the significance of designating a group as a foreign terrorist organization under U.S. law. That does not authorize the use of military force against them. That triggers certain criminal and economic powers that the federal government has. For example, the federal government can now prosecute individuals who provide support to those organizations under a law called the Material Support to Terrorism statute. The question of whether or not the president is going to order the use of military action, military force against the cartels in Mexico is a very, very different question, and it implicates complicated issues of international and domestic constitutional law. Under international law, the United States does not have an unlimited right to project military force into the sovereign territory of another nation. There has to be a good faith determination that we are acting in self-defense against an actual or imminent armed attack, not just a threat to the American people. Nobody denies that the importation of narcotics threatens and harms American people.
Could I ask you, did you support the assassination of bin Laden, Soleimani, and Baghdadi on legal grounds?
Absolutely, because in those situations, those operations were conducted in the context of an ongoing armed conflict that was triggered by violence of a scale directed against the United States and other coalition partners that you don't see with the cartels. They're not crossing the border and attacking border patrol stations, law enforcement agencies. Interestingly, that happened from Mexico in 1915 when Pancho Villa attacked Columbus, New Mexico, and it triggered a military intervention in response to that. So this really all boils down to two questions. Number one, will the United States get consent from Mexico to conduct these operations? If Mexico consents, then there's no issue of international law. It's purely a domestic constitutional law question. And number two, is there a credible basis to characterize the actions of the cartels in Mexico as an actual or imminent armed attack against the United States? And I think that's the real controversial issue legally.
Jonathan Gilliam, so Professor Corn saying it's going to be a difficult case for the Trump administration to prove that they have the legal authority to go after the cartels on foreign soil.
So I think we already have some precedents for this when it comes to the drug cartels, because we were in Colombia for many years and all over Central South America where we were battling their cartels. But the majority of that from the military standpoint was advisory, and law enforcement such as the DEA and the FBI would carry out operations, but it was always with the cooperation that the other two guests are speaking of. It was with the cooperation of those nations. We never went in and just did direct action without their cooperation. So we had long-standing relationships with these different nations. In Colombia, it was very effective, and they were able to bring down two of the larger cartels.
Geoffrey Corn there has delineated the difference between the cartels and an armed group that is preparing to attack the United States. Do you go along with that distinction?
Before we begin, let me clarify that I'm speaking as a my personal role as a professor of national security affairs at the National Defense University, my views do not represent those of the Department of Defense or the university. Right? But having said that, I completely back the professor's comments for a number of reasons. And there are a couple of things I'd like to raise. First, if we could pull out a little bit, don't forget that of the foreign terrorist organizations that have been designated, 2 of them are Venezuelan. And one of them is the Cartel de los Soles, which is run not just by the Venezuelan military, it's run with the complete authorization of the illegitimate president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. I would suggest that the more imminent use of military force by the United States is, in fact, against Venezuela. Now, I don't believe it's going to be a full-on invasion. You're not going to do that with a Marine Expeditionary Unit. But the U.S. Will bring all the instruments of national power to bear against Venezuela. I think President Trump tried to do something diplomatically during his first term. That failed. It failed during the Biden administration. I think Secretary Rubio has persuaded the president that the threat emanating from Venezuela does represent that. And to the professor's point, that is with the blessing of the government. So that's a different situation than that which obtains in Mexico. Although we would like on the U.S. side to see more engagement by the Mexican government against the transnational criminal organizations that are operating within Mexico. They are very different stories. The government of Mexico is doing something. There is coordination with the United States government. I've argued elsewhere that I believe it would be a huge mistake to intervene in Mexico militarily without their permission. And given our history, that permission is unlikely. But that said, there can and should be greater collaboration between all federal forces in the U.S. and those in Mexico.
But do you accept, as I have been told by an undercover anti-narcotics Mexican cop, that the Mexican government and even the police are so infiltrated by the cartels that cooperation, that real and full cooperation, may never come?
I don't fully accept that. I do accept the fact that corruption is rampant through Mexico. Certainly, the old federal police force was thoroughly corrupt. I would argue that despite certain elements, individual cases in the Mexican military, that is not the case, especially in the Mexican Navy. And so for that reason, the likelihood of the current government of Mexico collaborating the way I would argue the previous administration, the administration of López Obrador, with his abrazos no balazos policy, there was in fact collusion there. I think that's relatively clear. Right. I don't believe that's the case with the Sheinbaum administration. But she is between a rock and a hard place because in terms of domestic political situation in Mexico, she can't be seen as going against her predecessor and the party that he built. So as much as she might want to contribute more fully with the United States, her hands are really tied.
Professor Corn, do you think it's necessary for the U.S. military to get involved and to attack the cartels on foreign soil?
I think the history of the Mexican efforts, with support by the United States over the last 2 decades, to use military force against the cartels, not to mention the intercartel violence itself, suggests that it might not be as effective or even necessary as is suggested. And I think this is what the planners are probably looking at very carefully. It's one thing for the president to direct the Secretary of Defense to start planning for potential military action against cartel operations in Mexico. The planners now have to identify viable targets, the scope of the operation, and whether there's an achievable end state. And that is all ongoing now. That's what will inform the president and the Secretary of Defense to decide whether or not this is feasible and, as you ask, necessary ultimately.
Yes, so I appreciate the clarification that the professor made, and I would underscore it. 2 points. One, at the end of the day, this is not a military problem. This is a problem of supply and demand. And if you're going to attempt to resolve that, you need great intelligence and good law enforcement. The huge failure of multiple Mexican presidencies has been the lack of support to develop a qualified, professional, honest federal police force that can do that job. And so as the use of the Mexican military was not because that was the best instrument to use, it was the only instrument available when we go back to President Calderon. So the Mexican military can be effective in a limited fashion, but at the end of the day, what you need is great intelligence, both classic intelligence and law enforcement types of intelligence, to go against the individual leadership and start to take it down. Separately, the U.S. military should absolutely not be directed to intervene in Mexico without Mexico's authorization and support. I am willing to admit that there could be some degree of tactical success, but at a great political cost. Given our bilateral relationship, any use of unauthorized use of U.S. military force in Mexico would set our relationship back dozens, if not 100 years. And so we must avoid that. We should continue to offer our support. And in fact, if you read the news recently, we have seen cases of Mexico permitting the use of drones to overfly sovereign Mexican territory. They understand that we bring intelligence capabilities to bear that they don't have. But if we were to intervene, we wouldn't just be fighting the transnational criminal organizations. The Mexican military has plans on what to do should the U.S. intervene again. And I suspect that we would be fighting against both the TCOs and the Mexican military. To what end? I strongly recommend against that move.
Jonathan, just asking you to sort of predict the future a little bit here, but if the US military did get involved with taking on the cartels directly, would they be successful? What would be their tactics?
This is not a typical military operation such as you see, which is black and white in the Ukraine, where one side is against the other. This is guerrilla warfare, and the way that these groups work is really in a system, not just tunnels per se that they go under the border into the United States, but everything is underground in the way that they work. But what is important to point out, and I have clients that I do protection for, and have been down to Mexico numerous times over the past 2 years. And then when I was a SEAL, was also down in Mexico for a period of time. It's important to understand the dynamics of that nation and how it has deteriorated. Just when I was down there 2 months ago in Mexico City, 7 miles from where we were, one of the mayor's advisors, two of the mayor's advisors, were murdered while we were there. They were assassinated by the cartel. So the overall structure of the nation is so dangerous. At the same time, what used to be a very Catholic society has deteriorated. So along with the morals and ethics of the basic citizenry have changed, so has the violence and the growth of the cartel has gotten such that many of the locations within that nation are just unrulable by the government. So all of these different things have to be taken into account, because if it gets any worse, the government themselves may get to a point where even they can't fight against these cartels. The cartels do have military and logistical strength, or military, I should say military weaponry and logistics like a military unit would. But they really are dependent on moving their product. So that's the Achilles heel. They don't exist to rule. They exist to make money. And as long as our whatever forces are used or the planners are planning, that is the thing that they have to keep in mind, because actual military service within there, where we go in with special operations, for instance, on the ground, that may never be needed. Intelligence work and opening up to all the different aspects of that intelligence work that the United States government has is the most important thing. And also building that relationship with Mexico to the point where they realize, because I don't believe Mexico, here's the real problem, is Mexico doesn't understand the dilemma that they're in. I just truly don't believe that they see that. Having been down there and speaking to many different officials down there, I don't believe that they understand the tipping point that they're at right now in their own nation.
Jonathan, it does seem that no matter what the US government does, the cartels are able to adapt. I'll give you an example. They're now smuggling more migrants through America's northern border with Canada, and then back in the south, they're struggling with the border wall, but they're using tunnels more. And we went to El Paso in West Texas, right up on the border with Mexico, and our local guide, OMAR Chavez, who's been in law enforcement for many years, he showed us some of them. Have a look at this report, and then I'll ask you a question off the back.
So this is one of the points where illegal immigrants will come out of the manhole.
You're serious? Illegal immigrants coming up through the manhole?
Yes.
Where does the tunnel take you?
Well, there's different channels of sewage system. So they'll make their way somehow through the sewage system into the U.S. or El Paso sewage system, and they will come out in residential areas. This is an abandoned residential area under construction. So this is one of the points where they will actually come out, and there's more along this neighborhood area.
Okay, Omar, so where are we going next?
We're gonna go to a point where a tunnel was just discovered a couple of months ago. That's an Apra. It's a residential neighborhood, crime-infested area in Ciudad Juarez. And we have the water overflow system for the Rio Grande. On the other side of the Border Patrol unit, there's the Rio Grande. So we have the water overflow system from the Rio Grande.
Yep.
And then we have the drainage and water overflow system from I-10 and the highways up ahead. They come across the border, jump in the fence or through the tunnels. They make their way in through this ravine or overflow, which is covered by vegetation. Perfect cover, and they can reach 2 points. They can reach the train tracks along the highway, and all they have to do is jump on the train, or they go farther north, and they come out at the University of Texas campus and onto the main streets.
So Omar, in the distance there, we've got regular police, El Paso police, and they're positioned here by the tunnels. So this point right here is what you're keeping an eye on down there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what happens down there?
Down there, I mean, people try to come across. Obviously, they get caught with current sometimes.
The weather is strong. See, sometimes there's rescue, there's border patrol comes rescue, see stuff.
Things like that.
And do you have the powers to apprehend them, or do you have to just report them?
No, my goal is just really safety, to make sure that they're not crossing. God forbid, like one of our citizens driving and ends up getting into a car accident. Yeah. And that's our concern, the major concern, right? Yeah. They don't have any warrants and stuff. I mean, basically, Border Patrol.
Right. Have you seen a difference in the numbers crossing since January?
They've slowed down since the change of, they started slowing down at the end of Biden's administration. He had put some things into place. So we saw a decrease, but not as a decrease that you see now. It's a big change.
It's sort of like a game of whack-a-mole, isn't it, Jonathan? You shut down one route of entry, then another one pops open. It's under the wall, it's over the wall with drones. Is there any way that the United States can ever really shut these tunnels down?
Well, as we've seen around the world in different operations, tunnels are like drones. They've become more effective because technology has become more effective. The ability to dig tunnels faster is something that the cartels are exploiting greatly. And the difficulty, people need to realize, they can pick a random house, for instance, in Mexico that is close to the border, and a random location, house or structure of some kind in the United States in a random location, and that tunnel can go right from that house in Mexico right up into the location within the United States. So you wouldn't even know that there's a tunnel because there's no visible entry or exit. They're inside actual structures. So really this comes down to luck, first of all, but also it comes down to intelligence work. The more arrests they're able to make, the more intelligence they're able to gather, and using all the technology, new technology that you have to detect these tunnels, and an understanding of where they can dig and how long it takes and what they can move through that area, you can start to put together an effective picture of where these things are occurring, and then hopefully narrow it down to that specific location. But it is very difficult.
Jonathan Gilliam, Professor Geoffrey Corn, and Craig Deare, thank you all very much for your contributions today. Really appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT1. Until next week then, goodbye.